one thing I want to say before I start, I am not by nature a formal person. So if you have questions or something I should say is unclear, which it can tend to be, please shout out a question or tell me it didn't make sense or tell me to talk more slowly. Despite having taught for way too many years, I still tend to accelerate when I start talking about topics I like. And this is kind of a topic I like because this whole cloud thing needs a lot of demystifying. And there we go. A lot of jargon. This is the last 5 years of my life in a nutshell. Blah, 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 cloud. It really is true. I mean, it is amazing to me how many places I will go and people say, well, what we need to do is we need to get something in the cloud. When my question is always, what problem are you actually trying to solve? I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by, if I can make this work, there we go, cloud. What we mean by cloud computing. And there's other kinds of cloud, but I'm going to talk about cloud computing. We've got Amazon EC2. Amazon loves to put acronyms with an E in front of it for elastic. I don't know why that is, but it makes them very happy to have an E in there. They have elastic IP addresses as well. Google's got a new offering which I think looks really good, but is still fairly up in the air in terms of details. And there's some other things. OpenStack, there's a few other providers that can set you up with a cloud. Why would you want to look at this sort of thing? And I apologize. Jenny made beautiful slides. These are awesome. Thank you, Jenny. My slides look horrible. They're lists of sentences with little dots and things I remember. So sometimes I get distracted by the cartoons. But they're awesome cartoons. So I want to talk about why most people are looking into this and where the really good, sweet solutions are. And then where things can really come out and bite you in the rear. So this is one of the really good reasons to look at cloud computing, semi-managed infrastructure. In fact, for me, this is really the killer app. The part I've always hated about running systems is the hardware failures. I mean, the longer you spin a drive, the more likely it's going to fail. And they never fail in the middle of a convenient practiced outage. It's usually 2 hours after you left for vacation. So you're now walking somebody through swapping a drive, or they're trying to figure out who still has access to the machine room. All of the cloud providers, Amazon, Google, the OpenStack guys, they abstract this away entirely from you. So there's really, ideally, no longer any concern about a drive failing. Their drives fail all the time in such a way that you'll never notice. Your application just keeps going. One exception to this, and there's always a gotcha, is let's hypothetically say a hurricane hits the eastern seaboard and Amazon loses an entire set of data centers. This happens, then you notice the outage. So nothing's ever perfect. But the semi-managed infrastructure is really probably one of the biggest strengths. Having gone through a lot of physical provisioning, 12-week turnaround to get a machine going, and then 10 weeks in, you're still working through making sure all the cables get plugged in correctly. It's very painful. This is just something that you really don't have to worry about with Amazon or with Google Compute Engine. And I'm going to say with Amazon a lot because I do a lot of stuff in Amazon. Please do not take this as a product endorsement. All vendors are terrible. Some are just worse than others. So I'm used to using Amazon. There's nothing magic about them. OpenStack, OpenStack is actually a technology stack, but there are some other guys who provide stuff. And like I say, Google looks good, but my generic Amazon will be cloud computing. There we go. So, and I should say, as I mentioned before, we had full control of the OS. We've actually got root access. And this, I went backwards. This differentiates from fully, come on, there we go, from fully managed infrastructure. And I've worked with that too. If you're not familiar with it, fully managed infrastructure is I want a user account added to a machine. I call my vendor, they bill me for 4 hours, and then they add a user account to a machine. And then I call them and say, hey, I meant for it to be named Steve instead of Joe. In fact, the ticket said Steve, but you made one named Joe. And they say, oh, and they bill me for 4 more hours, and they fix the name of the service account. But that's fully managed infrastructure. With semi-managed, you've still got your own admins who take care of things. There we go. This is one of the big reasons people are moving to the cloud stuff. And this is a killer draw. It is essentially a digital temporary agency. If you've got enough computing job to fill up your whole data center and run it for 2 years, well, you're going to run it for 2 years unless you can bring more resources on board. And you can happily do that at Google or Amazon. In fact, they'll give you just as many computers as you can afford. How can they tell what you can afford? Conveniently, your credit card has a credit limit. And right up to that credit limit, they will happily spin up machines for you. So you can, for these asymmetric compute loads, you can bring on a couple of dozen or a couple of hundred nodes and quickly crunch through your data, spin everything down. So one of the clients I'm working with now does that a fair amount. We have something to do, we bring up 4 or 5 nodes, we run it for a day, then we turn it off. And then next week we look at our estimated usage prices and we say, oh wow, somebody used some machines. So yeah, why buy computing hardware that's going to be out of date relatively soon? So now, that said, this is another big reason a lot of people are going cloud, and I think this is IBM's favorite reason to go cloud. I mean no offense to anyone actually from IBM. Buzzword compliance. Hey, we've got a problem. What's the neatest new thing we can do to fix this? We should put it in the cloud. Well, I suppose it's an approach, but it doesn't fix any of your underlying problems. Again, the real strengths of your cloud computing are computers where you don't have to swap the hard drive, where you don't have to worry about battery backups in event of an outage, and you don't have to worry about a backhoe taking out your internet connection. Those are the reasons we should. So buzzword compliance, I see it used, oh hey neat, I see it used for this sort of thing all the time, especially these 2 things. I see poor procedure, people moving from managed computing to semi-managed computing, moving to the cloud in hopes that this will fix their system for deploying software without ever actually addressing how they're deploying software. So the biggest question is always, what problem are you actually trying to solve with this? And if people can't state it, you're probably not going to fix it with cloud computing. There we go. Now here, one of the common rationale, and I'm not even going to say this is a good or bad thing. This is just the reality. One of the big reasons we see cloud stuff going is you can get your job done. People basically want to work. They want to complete the tasks they're given. And if it's a, I'll say hypothetical, because it's a company I worked for years ago, if it's a 12-week turnaround to provision a single server, and that's how long it's going to take you to get computing resources, people will figure out other ways to get their job done. And so you'll see companies spinning up their cloud presence just so they can get a machine now. It's almost a Wild West kind of approach. It's time to get the job done, so they're going to sidestep the procedure. And these are some of the reasons you do this. And whether it's 12 weeks to provision a machine, or you want to install some piece of software, some middleware, maybe your company standard is all Java all the time, but you've got a bunch of C# stuff that looks like it's really going to work out well for you. Well, if you can't get anybody to spin up a mono environment or a .NET server internally, the natural place to turn to is the cloud. And so you'll see quite a few companies with a cloud presence that maybe don't even really realize yet they have a cloud presence. It's out there. There's a few machines, or a lot of machines, but it's not officially on the radar. And storage acquisition. Storage acquisition is actually one of the big strengths of Amazon and Google. When you want space, you can have it now. And there's no time waiting for EMC to back a truck up and deliver lots of racks of equipment. The storage typically won't be as fast, and you're going to pay for it by the gig, by the month. But if you're only going to use it for 2 months, that's not so bad. Even if you're going to use it for 10 years, but it's a resource that you couldn't get before, it's a perfect business decision, and people will make that decision.